Ambition is seen as a great thing today. It's seen as a way to get things done. When people have drive, progress is made. And yet, ambition can also cause problems. Ambition can cause problems in the world and also in the church. Maybe you've been involved in a youth group where there are big personalities. And when those big personalities have a difference of opinion, there's tension, there's difficulties. Or maybe you can remember a situation, maybe you know of a situation where someone was not elected to a position they wanted to be in. Maybe as president of an organization in a church, or maybe onto a committee in a church. And they were offended. And that caused problems. Where have you seen ambition causing problems in the church? And how do you stop ambition destroying the church? We find the answer to that question in Mark chapter 10, verses 32 to 45. The first thing that we see in this passage is that Jesus willingly gives up his life. Jesus and the 12 apostles and also a larger crowd of people are making their way up to Jerusalem. Jesus is leading the way. He's out in front. And Mark 10 verse 32 tells us the disciples were astonished. Why would the disciples be astonished that Jesus was leading the way as they travelled to Jerusalem? Well, the disciples knew that Jesus was going to face a great difficulty in Jerusalem. That Jesus had spoken before of how he would suffer terrible trouble in Jerusalem. He'd spoken of it in terms of death. The disciples didn't understand that he meant that literally. But they did understand that he would face great hardship in Jerusalem. And so they're surprised that he's so willing to go to Jerusalem. They're surprised that he's leading the way, that he's ahead of them, that he's keen to get there. If a successful athlete is going towards the awards ceremony to receive their medal, they may be travelling with a crowd of other athletes, walking towards the place where the ceremony happens. The other athletes may be chatting among themselves, quite relaxed, enjoying the evening. But the athlete who's going to get the award could be out at the front, keen to get there, keen to soak up the atmosphere, keen to enjoy the whole experience. They're in a rush to get there. It's somewhere they want to be. But if a child is out for a walk with her family, does something she shouldn't do, is told she's going to have to be punished when she gets home, most likely she'll be lagging behind the whole way home. If you're going somewhere you want to be, you're in a rush to get there. If you're going somewhere you don't want to be, if you're going to do something you don't want to do, you're usually very slow about getting there. Jesus is keen to get to Jerusalem. And that shows us that Jesus was willing to give up his life. Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen to him in Jerusalem. He's spoken to the disciples at least twice already about his death. We have that recorded in Mark chapter 8, verse 31. Also Mark chapter 9, verse 31. But in chapter 10, he gives more details about what's going to happen to him in Jerusalem. He says, the Son of Man, that was Jesus' title for himself, will be delivered over to the chief priests and teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles. He knew that the leaders of his nation would give him over to the Romans. And he knew that the Romans were going to mock him, that they were going to make fun of him, that they were going to ridicule him. He knew that they would spit on him. He knew that he would be flogged with Roman whips and that he would be killed. Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen to him. But still he was out in front, leading the way. He was willing to give up his life. If you're one of his people, if you're trusting in him, Jesus was eager to die for you. That's how much he loves you. That's the first thing we see in this passage. Jesus willingly gives up his life. Secondly, we see that ambition causes trouble. James and John, two of the disciples, come to Jesus. They say, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Jesus isn't going to be conned into committing to anything he doesn't want to do. He's not going to be manipulated. He says, what do you want me to do for you? And they reply, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. Jesus tells them, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink? Can you be baptized with the baptism I will be baptized with? To drink a cup was a way of referring to enduring suffering. It's used that way in different passages in the Bible. In Psalm 75 verse 8, it says, in the hand of the Lord is a cup full of foaming wine mixed with spices. He pours it out, and all the wicked of the earth drink it down to its very dregs. Jesus is asking these two disciples, are they able to endure the suffering that he will endure? He says, are you able to be baptized with the baptism I will be baptized with? The word baptize is connected with the meaning to dip, to sink. It's used symbolically sometimes of hardships and disasters which you can sink into and which overwhelm you. Jesus used it that way in Luke 12, verse 50. He says, "But I have a baptism to undergo, and what constraint I am under, until it is completed." He's asking the disciples, are they able to face the difficulties he will face? Are they able to die as he will die? They respond, yes, we can. We are able to do that. And Jesus says, you will. But to sit at my right hand or at my left, that's not for me to grant. Those places belong to those for whom they've been prepared. The other 10 disciples hear about James and John's request, and we're told that they became indignant in verse 41. And the word means to be indignant, to be aroused, to be angry. It's the same word that was used of Jesus in verse 14 of Mark 10. When parents were bringing babies to Jesus to bless them, the disciples rebuked the parents, and we're told that that made Jesus indignant. Here the 10 disciples are indignant when they hear of what James and John have asked Jesus for. James and John wanted the highest position, the best place in heaven. And that caused trouble in the disciples. Ambition causes trouble. Even when you want things that are good, it can cause problems. And maybe you want promotion at work. But if someone else wants promotion to the same job, it can cause tension, it can cause conflict. Ambition causes trouble. So how do you stop ambition destroying the church? Well, Jesus tells us that we are to make it our ambition to be the greatest servant. He calls the disciples together. He says, you know that rulers among the Gentiles lord it over them. Their high officials exercise authority over the people. Those in high positions in the world take advantage of that position. And they use it to get the most that they can out of it. They use their authority over others. But Jesus says that it is not like that with us. It's not like that with Christians. Being a Christian isn't about getting a high position. Being a Christian is about serving. Being a Christian is not about being elected president of a certain organization. It's not about getting on to a particular committee. It's not about getting a high position. Instead, being a Christian is about helping others, about serving others. James and John had said to Jesus, "We want you to do whatever you ask for us," in verse 35. And Jesus picks up on that in verses 43 and 44. He uses the same word want, and he says, "Whoever wants to become great among you, whoever wants to be first, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant." They must do all they can to help others. Whoever wants to be first, whoever wants to be the best Christian, must be slave. Slave is a stronger word than servant. A slave has no freedom. A slave must do what they're told all of the time. Jesus is not telling us that we're to let others manipulate us and take advantage of us. But he is telling us that we're to do whatever is best for them all the time. The steps to greatness in God's kingdom don't lead up to the great halls in the mansion. Instead, they lead down to the servants' quarters. Make it your ambition to be the greatest servant. If someone needs the grass cut, cut the grass for them. If someone needs shopping bought and brought to them, buy their shopping, bring them their shopping. If someone needs time, give them time. Call them on the phone. Chat to them. If someone needs encouragement, send them something in the post. Maybe read the Bible with someone. Pray with them. Do what you can to lift them up. We're not to think about what would promote me, but rather we're always to think about what would help them. Jesus says, "Whoever wants to be first must be slave of all." Is there anyone in the church you haven't done something to help recently? Is there anything you could do to help them? Is there an elderly person you could phone? Is there a young person you could message? Make it your ambition to be the greatest servant. Do you see how that solves our problem? Ambition causes trouble in the church. But if it is your ambition to be the greatest servant, that's not going to cause any trouble. Nobody's going to be offended if you help them. Nobody's going to be annoyed. It's not going to put anyone out if you're doing what's best for them. But how can we do that? How can we become the greatest servant? Well, who is, without doubt, the greatest person who has ever lived? It's Jesus. It has to be. We're to strive to be the same as him. Jesus goes on to say, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served. Even Jesus didn't come to be served. If anyone should be served, it is Jesus. He is the King of the universe. Even as he walked on this earth, he was holding the whole universe together. If anyone deserves to be served, it is Jesus. But even Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve. Surely we should want to be like him. There's no one greater we could be like. And Jesus gives us the perfect example of how to serve. He says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. And to give his life. The passage is finishing where it started. It started with Jesus leading the way up to Jerusalem, willingly going to give his life. And it ends by telling us that he came to give his life a ransom for many. If we want to know how to serve, look at Jesus. Jesus was rushing ahead to get to Jerusalem. We should be rushing ahead to help others, willing even to give up our lives for others. Pirates capture an oil tanker off the coast of Somalia. They demand a ransom. They demand that millions of dollars be paid for the ship to be released. A ransom is a price that needs to be paid for someone or something to be set free. We have sinned against God. We deserve his punishment. And that price must be paid. Jesus tells us that he gave his life as a ransom. He died on the cross to pay that price, to take the punishment that we deserved, so that we could be set free. It says to give his life a ransom for many. It doesn't say for all. Jesus hasn't automatically wiped out the sins of everyone on earth. Instead, he has paid the penalty for those who trust in him. What about you? Are you trusting in him? Will you trust in him? If you come to him and ask him, he will take your punishment. He will pay the price that's needed for you to be set free. Come to him and ask him to forgive you. And he will. How do you stop ambition destroying the church? Ambition causes trouble. Jesus tells us we're to make it our ambition to be the greatest servant, to be like him who willingly gave up his life for us.